Hey, ambitious dentist, welcome to Start Your Dental Practice, the show for existing and aspiring dentists to take your dental practice to the highest possible level. I'm your host, Jonathan VanHorn, CPA and ABD, founder of DentistMetrics.com. In every episode, we aim to demystify the how to start a dental practice problem by bringing on world-class dentists, influencers, and consultants in the dental industry to pick their brain about how to get past the barriers involved from going from no practice to being a practice owner to owning your own successful dental practice. Hey guys, great episode for you today with David Harris from Prosperident. He is the world's leading expert in embezzlement in dental practices. So we've got a lot of great information to go through today. I'm going to give you the high points so that you can be sure to listen in for the areas that are most important to you. So we're going to talk about today the mental shift that happens when doing a buyout or a transition to dental practices that could cause embezzlement to happen in your practice. We're going to get the number one piece of advice that David would give to a new office that's just starting to hire team members. We're going to talk about why most dentists don't enjoy the hiring process and what happens after a new hire joins that you need to avoid. We're going to talk about background checks ad nauseum, the entire hiring process that's going to be invaluable to you when you start hiring someone in your practice. We talk about all the tips and tricks that can be done to make sure that your hiring process is rock solid. There are so many good little tidbits of information in today's interview about background checks and about the hiring process that you just really can't afford to miss. We're going to talk about the questions to talk to other employers about. We're going to talk about what phone number to call. We're going to talk about all these different things that on the surface seem so given. They seem so elementary, I guess is the way of saying it. But whenever you actually hear David talk about it and all the little tips and tricks he's come across in the years, you're going to be blown away by how sophisticated some people can be whenever they blow past the resume process. We're going to talk about the one question you can't get wrong whenever you're asking them for a reference from a previous employee. We're going to talk about cross-referencing employment dates and why that's important. The legal impediments that you'll have whenever you're hiring someone in a dental practice. The two pieces of advice that David would give to someone taking over another practice. How a dentist can embezzle from another dentist, which is crazy to think about that could happen, but it does all the time. Why some dentists don't want to use a CPA to do due diligence. Why some dentists we consider to be perfectionists. We're going to talk about what category of employee is more likely to steal from a dentist. And here's a quick thing. Do you think it's going to be a new employee or an existing employee that it's going to be? So listen in for the answer to that one. So we're going to talk about the behavior of people that are stealing from you and the thieves and how they'll promise you the world and what they'll be talking to you about before they embezzle from you. And we're also going to talk about the biggest case that David's ever seen in embezzlement. I'll give you a hint. It's more than $500,000. So at the end of today's show, I've created a special checklist based off of today's interview to keep on hand to help avoid embezzlement in your practice. Now, I'm not going to promise that it will completely diminish the chances of embezzlement happening, and David has tons of these things that go way more in depth than mine does, but mine is kind of like an intro to it, if you will, and it's based completely off of today's episode. So I even set it up as a quarterly reminder for me to look over these points in my accounting practice to help me be reminded of all the great information in today's episode. So be sure to listen in on how to find out how to get that for free. And now on to today's guest interview. So I know a lot of people when they're starting to buy a dental practice or start a dental practice, one of the thoughts that comes across their minds, you'll read these horror stories in the news about dentists being taken advantage of, being stolen from, being embezzled from. And so to answer a lot of the questions I believe the people in those situations will have, I could think of no one better to come and speak to us than David Harris. David is the CEO of Prosperident. He is one of the world's leading experts on dental office embezzlement. Prosperident's team of specialized investigators has consulted on hundreds of frauds annually committed against both general dentists and dental specialists. He has the distinct pleasure of hearing cell door slam shut on many embezzlers, which is a great Great thing to have in an intro, by the way. He is a licensed private investigator with a graduate degree in applied mathematics, and he's a CPA. He's dual certified in fraud investigation. He possesses both the Certified Fraud Examiner designation from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners and the Certified in Financial Forensics designation from the American Institute of CPAs, which is, has my absolute seal of approval. He's a member of Mensa, which, if people don't know what Mensa is, that is an organization for like the top 1 or 2% IQs in the nation or in the world. And he's been interviewed on the subject of embezzlement by many leading dental publications and organizations. He's a prolific writer, authors, and co-authors of a dozen or more articles that appear in major dental publications. He's lectured all over. He's spoken at regional, national, international dental conferences. He's highly entertaining, and he's a very engaging speaker who draws on a vast amount of experience in the field. David, thank you so much for coming on. Did I do a good job with the introduction?
That's wonderful, Jonathan. It is so good to be here with you.
Good. So, David and I cannot remember how we initially met. I know that, I'm really hoping it wasn't for the fact that we were trying to find a thief in a practice. I believe whenever we entered the dental industry, my old business partner and I, we were looking for people in the industry that had a CPA designation or had some type of connection to the world we were in. And David was one of the first people we actually spoke with, and he was just so committed to the dental industry and so helpful to us whenever we came in that was really one of the reasons why I wanted to get him on here to talk to everybody, because he is so good at this stuff that is, frankly, for a lot of people, it gives a lot of displeasure to think about. It's kind of scary. No one wants to think that, Miss Susie is stealing from us. But there's a lot of practice owners that have that in their mind already. I mean, the way that we try the audience we're talking to today is mostly new dentists, people who've probably been out of dental school in the past 10 years, who are going to be starting their own dental practice or are going to buy into a new dental practice. So I'm hoping that they understand the brevity and the importance of knowing that this can happen. So David, can you talk a little bit about what happens on average to dentists in these situations?
Absolutely. The first thing I'll give people, Jonathan, is just a little statistical overview of embezzlement. Mm-hmm. Published statistics, and these come from places like the American Dental Association, suggest that there's about a 60% chance that a dentist will be embezzled at some point in their career.
It's terrible.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's also understated a little bit because there are some things that aren't known. For example, there's no way to quantify how much embezzlement goes on, and nobody ever finds it.
Do we have an idea of a number that is on average or, that is commonplace?
The last time we looked at our own case files, which was 2013, the average amount stolen by the time somebody got caught was about $109,000. This is not a dental statistic, but the the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, ACFE, mm-hmm. Which issues one of the designations I have. The ACFE number for small business as a whole is about $140,000.
Really? So the average for, the internal average you have is $109,000. The average for small businesses in general, which how do they do you have an idea of how they define that? Is that like, probably more than, up to $5 million in revenue probably?
Actually, I don't think it's even a small business number. I think that's a generic business number. And they say essentially that at the point somebody gets caught, that's how much they've stolen. And I wouldn't take anything away from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners number, Jonathan, except that it kind of reinforces our own internal number for dentists.
Okay, great. But the frequency has to be so much higher than an average industry. What do you think? Why do you think that average is so high?
The three types of organization that get victimized the most with embezzlement are government, charities, and healthcare. And when you look at what those three have in common, or what sets them aside from every other kind of business, most businesses have an exchange of goods or services for money. So if I'm selling cars or flowers or whatever, there's an exchange of those things for money. Mm-hmm. Government really doesn't have that, and charities, by their nature, gather money from one group and distribute it to another group. Healthcare and dentistry in particular does have the exchange, but it's kind of an imperfect one. And the reason it's imperfect is because of insurance. In other words, in most practices, most of the time, the majority of payment comes from third parties who aren't there. So that creates some opportunities that aren't there if I, for example, sell cars.
Yeah, there's another duality of that, or another common thread amongst those. There's a lot of red tape in all of those industries. There are a lot of, and the more complex that type of red tape gets, the more chances for mistakes being made, I guess, could
absolutely occur. I mean, the further you step away from a kind of free, unencumbered market, and you go into something that is regulated or insured, as is the case with dentistry, yeah, you make it easier for somebody to steal. The other factor in dentistry that maybe people don't think about, I started investigating dental office embezzlement in 1989. And that was 1989 BC, before computers. In those days, everybody used the pegboard system. And embezzlement happened, but the dollar amounts involved were relatively small. The time when the amount stolen really started to climb was the mid-1990s, and that's when people were trading in their one-right systems for computerized systems. And what a lot of dentists were doing mentally was taking a couple of steps backward from the information. Now when they needed something, instead of getting it themselves, which even the least business-oriented dentist could do in the pegboard system, now the way that they got it was most of them asked staff. And that gave an opportunity for manipulation and, of course, to conceal embezzlement. So that's when we started to see the numbers climb. And honestly, they haven't stopped climbing since. One question you didn't ask me, but a lot of people do, is, well, what's the biggest theft you've ever seen? Biggest one's about $2 million. And this may not make your audience feel better, but that was taken from a sole practitioner over about 5.5 years.
Mm. And there another important thing for people to learn, I think, is that embezzlement does not always equal just a specific type of theft. Is that correct? Like
there are a lot of variants. When I talk to dentists about embezzlement, the thing that they tend to think is that it's somebody stealing cash from their office, and that happens a lot. It's not that hard also to monetize other forms of payment. For example, most doctors think that a check payable to them, written by a patient or an insurance company, is really hard to steal, and it's not. I could also steal credit card payments, third-party payments from somebody like Care Credit or OrthoBank for an orthodontist. Any form of monetary transfer can be interfered with. But Jonathan, it doesn't stop there. Mm-hmm. Every dentist I've ever met has this thing I'll call the gold jar in the back somewhere. When somebody gets one of their old crowns out and they don't want it anymore, it goes in the gold jar. And this isn't really controlled or secured in any way. And I've had a lot of dentists observe to me that, with the price of gold going up in the past 7 or 8 years, that gold jar just doesn't seem to be filling up as quickly as it used to.
Very good points. One that I had that was this was before I was in the dental industry only. We had someone that was paying their utility bills out of the company credit card or company bank account because they were the ones writing the checks.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's very low level thinking by the person doing it, that they wouldn't be caught at some point in time. But that being said, that was an inherited client, and we didn't, we caught it after a long time. It hadn't been done just because I'm very analytical, and I say, why is there 3 water bills being paid out of one office location? And we asked for invoices, and one of them mysteriously they couldn't come up with ever, and that's whenever we found out that's what was happening. So, so it happens in a bunch of different ways, right?
We've cataloged about 300 different variants.
Wow!
And we're not done.
I
get one of my investigators on every couple of weeks. I'll get a kind of excited call from one of our investigators, and they found some new way. So there are a lot of possibilities. I mean, I hate to say it, but there's a porosity to a dental practice that I suspect not all of your audience really appreciates. There are a lot of ways to do this.
So you mentioned earlier one of the facts that the dental owner will typically lean on the staff. I have to think that would be an exponentially higher risk factor for a new dental practice owner or someone who is buying into a dental practice, because a lot of people I talk to about the fact that after, I was in school for 6 years because you have to have a lot of hours to be able to get a CPA license, and I have a master's degree and everything like that. And I thought, after I got out of school with my 6 years of education only in business training, and if I was told I'm going to have $700,000, $800,000 in debt after I've started a new practice, or upwards to 1.2 probably if I'm buying out a practice, including student loan debt, not to mention if the fact of I'm going to buy a house at any point in time. I'm also going to have to be a leader and business owner of somewhere between 5 and 8 other employees, all who have more experience actually inside of the business than myself. I would have thought you were crazy, even though my only education had been business throughout that entire process. And then you put into the fact that dentists have to do exactly that, but they have no business training. I have to think that they have to lean on those staff, or they'll try to lean on that staff more often. Is that something you found, or does that seem like a fair analysis?
It is definitely one of the danger zones when there's a practice transition going on. And a couple of possibilities. One is that without realizing it, somebody buying into a practice ends up putting their money into a situation where embezzlement's going on. The second scenario that we see sometimes is that embezzlement wasn't happening, but then a new owner gets in, and staff may not feel the same loyalty to the new owner that they felt to the former owner, and it becomes a little bit easier for them to steal. And you just nailed it. You've got somebody coming into a practice with a barrel full of debt. They're feeling under some financial pressure. They normally want to get improved results over what the former owner got from the same practice. And that means cracking the whip on the staff a bit, and sometimes it backfires.
Absolutely. A lot of the problems that we see practice owners take over when they start a new practice is they'll inherit bad contracts. They'll inherit, the fact that they're paying the hygienist, 45% higher than what the average is in their area. And they aren't a performing hygienist, but they know every patient there is that comes through that practice on a daily basis. And so they just inherit all of these problems. I can only imagine how much more difficult it would be if that same hygienist was stealing from the practice, unbeknownst to the new owner, that was leaning on them to try and make sure that they were, being taken care of so that they can service all of that debt. So given that, what type of advice would you give to someone who is just about to start a dental practice, whether that be a new office or a transition? Let's start with the new office. They're just going to do a startup, and they're going to start hiring people. What type of advice would you give to that person?
What I'll say to that, great question. What I'll say is that it's really easy to make hiring mistakes. Mm-hmm. I've asked many dentists every time I speak somewhere. I ask for a show of hands of how many people in the room enjoy the hiring process. And I think I've probably asked 3,000 or 4,000 dentists that, and about 4 have put up their hands. And I'm pretty sure most of them were lying. Every dentist I've ever met despises trying to find that one perfect person out of a lot of candidates. It's just not something they enjoy doing. And what that means, Jonathan, is that when they find somebody who looks like they fit the bill, the doctor is so happy to be able to get out of this unpleasant job that every ounce of skepticism vanishes from their brain. It does not dawn on dentists that we need to know if somebody has a criminal record. Rough numbers, 25% of adults in the United States have a criminal record. That doesn't mean they're unhireable for a dental practice, but it's something we should know about them. If somebody was arrested for marijuana possession 20 years ago, I'm not sure that would mean they're unsuitable for work in my practice. But as some people have found out the hard way, if they were convicted of stealing 3 years ago, that probably is job related.
So you would say the first thing to do is whenever you're hiring someone, find a good candidate, but then do a background check. Is there any type of, there's a lot of services out there now that you can do that fairly inexpensively. Is there a certain way you tell people to do that, or?
Yeah, what I tell them to do is hire somebody who's in that business and get them to do it. Yes, there are online services that will do it. They scare me a little bit because it's a little more complex job than people think about. And if we're talking about criminal records, and let's be clear that criminal records are only a very small part of background screening. Mm-hmm. But if we're talking about the possibility that somebody has a criminal record, there are about 60 places in the United States where that criminal record could reside. When we count 50 states plus District of Columbia plus the federal registry, if they've committed a federal crime, plus Puerto Rico, Marianas, Guam, there are a lot of places. The other thing is this: if you do a criminal records check and it comes back clean, that does not mean somebody's hireable. First of all, there's a long period of time between when somebody commits a crime and when they acquire a criminal record. That can be 4 years. And in that period, nothing will show up on a criminal records check, even though they've been fired from their job. They have been charged by police. They may have a court date that's already scheduled. None of those things will show up on a criminal records check. What will show up on a criminal records check is convictions.
That's a great point.
And that happens a long time later. So we have to view the criminal records check as a process where a positive result probably disqualifies a candidate. A negative result may just mean that we need to ask more questions.
Really great point. That doesn't even take into account the fact that with that background check, there may be things that they weren't actually ever charged for. I mean, if
absolutely, the criminal records check is a binary check. It goes to each registry and says, do you have any record of convictions on this person? And if the answer is yes, then what they're convicted for will come back. And as I say, there are some crimes that are probably more important than others, and there are recent offenses probably are, for the most part, more important than something that happened 20 years ago when somebody was in college. But the fact that the answer comes back no does not mean this person is hireable. It simply means that they have not been yet convicted of something anywhere. going back to what else you might want to check, it astounds me that I couldn't get a job as a delivery person with FedEx without doing a drug test. But I can work in most dental offices that have access to controlled substances as well as HIPAA protected health information. And I can do all that without being tested. I don't get it. Let's talk about reference checks for a minute.
Absolutely. I find that there's so many owners are, especially in the dental industry, you're so busy, especially if you have an existing practice, you're busy all day long. And so to call another business owner or another business reference can be, they just put it off and they just assume, well, if they gave it to me, then it's going to be fine. Or if they have a reference on the sheet of paper, they don't think, is this their best friend that's just acting as a personal reference, or is this a professional reference?
Well, you raised a couple of great points there. The first thing is this: I would never bother calling, quote, personal references. I do not give a darn what somebody's 7th grade science teacher or parish priest think about them. Okay. There's only one kind of reference that's relevant. That's former employers. And I have a simple rule. You talk to all employers in the last 5 years. Now, a couple of tips there, Jonathan. The first one is this. A lot of people give you a resume and they very helpfully give you the phone numbers of those former employers. Don't ever call those numbers. If somebody says that they worked for Dr. Smith in Little Rock, Arkansas, go to an online search engine and find the phone number of the office and call that number. And then you know who you're speaking with. We saw one case a few years ago where an applicant had given phone numbers that were actually 3 disposable cell phones that her aunt had. And taped on the back of each cell phone was who the aunt was supposed to answer that phone as when it rang. So
that's one of those things that it's truth is stranger than fiction in that structure. There's nothing in, I'm a trusting person. I'm obviously a lot to verify as many things as possible, giving my designation and everything else. But that's one of those things that is you take for granted that the phone number that they give you to call Dr. Smith is the phone number for that office. So that's really great insight.
The next thing we should talk about is what questions to ask when you get former employers on the phone. Mm-hmm. And I have a few. The first one is, and I encourage people to make this question very clear cut so that there's no ambiguity. And what I would say is, if you had a job that this person was suitable for, and if they were available, would you rehire them? And the answer to that will often speak volumes. The other thing is that most former employers view that as a safe question. Whereas if you ask them, well, did that person steal from you? A lot of attorneys would advise their clients not to answer that question because there's the potential for libel.
Yep, absolutely.
If you say very simple, I'm not looking for specific behaviors. I don't need to know anything other than, would you hire this person?
So for the people out there that don't understand while we're covering this, a lot of employers, and if you're an employer and you've ever been asked for information for a reference, there's a lot of stigma around references in today's litigious society. And the reason is because if you say this person was you want to be nice, you don't want to be the reason why someone doesn't receive employment. And so you say, they're a good person or something like that. And someone trusts you at that, and embezzlement comes up in the future, and your attorney probably doesn't want anything pointing back to you to say that you're the reason that they hired the person that stole from you. For example, whenever I got out of college, I worked for the largest accounting firm in our state at the time. And whenever I left there, their policy was if someone calls in regards to a former employer, their only statement they can make was that they were a former employee of the company. They wouldn't do any type of reference. They wouldn't do anything else. It didn't matter if you were a partner that, retired. It didn't matter if you were someone who was going to a different firm. It didn't matter if you were someone who got fired. That was all they would say. So it's really good to preface that into that part of it. I don't know if I'm in the same boat for that advice. Talk to your attorney about that probably. I'm just more open with my thoughts sometimes. Probably too much, as you can see by me sharing interviews with people all over the world. So
yeah, again, I think most dentists will feel some compulsion, especially if it was a bad employee, to at least steer you in the right direction. And again, one way to take advantage of that is to ask that simple question about would you rehire. The other thing we want to ask, Jonathan, we want to ask for exact dates of employment.
Mm-hmm.
So I would not prompt a former employer by saying, this person says that she worked for you from this date to that date. I would simply ask them a very open-ended question. What are the dates of employment? What we're looking for here is called the hidden job. So let's say I work for Dr. A, and I work for Dr. A for 5 years, and either I'm not stealing or I am, but I don't get caught. And then I go to work for Dr. B. And I work there for 4 months and I get caught stealing and I get fired. Now I'm applying to Dr. C. What I don't want here is I don't want Dr. C calling Dr. B. So what I do is I take the 5 years that I worked for Dr. A and I stretch it a little bit. And I make it 5.5 years. And now on my resume, Dr. B just disappears.
Great insight.
The way you find that is you ask the former employer that you have, which is Dr. A in this case. You ask Dr. A, well, what were the dates of employment? And he's going to give you dates that are 6 months shorter than what the resume says. Huge danger sign. The other thing I want to do there is I want to ask Dr. A, who did this person work for before they worked for you? And after they got fired by you, where did they go? And hopefully what Dr. A is going to say is, well, when this person got fired, they went to work for Dr. B. And I'm looking at the resume and I don't see Dr. B's name there anywhere. So the next thing I should do is I should call Dr. B, and I'm probably going to have to hold the phone a long way from my ear because I'm going to get a real earful from Dr. B about this employee. So continuity questions and dates will often show us the hidden jobs in a resume, and that's really what we're trying to find here. Of course, the other way people hide jobs is they say, I was home with children, I was traveling through Europe. They'll have kind of a dead spot on their resume, but they'll cover it with something else. The way I would suggest dealing with that stuff is that almost everybody who is traveling through Europe has a passport full of stamps. Bring it in.
Maybe ask how old the kids are.
Well, what I would do instead is I would ask to see their tax return for that year. Okay, because if they really were home with children, of course, that doesn't get reported on a slip anywhere, and their income would reflect that. So I'd want to see their tax return and the notice they get back from the IRS as being the way I would document that one. My point is that when somebody is out of the workforce, there's almost always some kind of documentary evidence. If they're drawing unemployment insurance, okay, there's all kinds of paperwork with that they can bring in and show you.
Great information. So, anything else to go?
We've got to put our skeptic hat on here, and we've got to say that another statistic I'll throw out for the benefit of your audience, Jonathan, is that about 60% of resumes have some kind of misstatement or lie on them. And it could be everything from claiming a hygiene diploma that I don't actually have to saying I was the office manager when my job title was receptionist. I mean, it could be minor, it could be major, but almost any resume falsification should be, first of all, identified, and secondly, some cause for concern.
Absolutely. I mean, if you can't trust one of the more basic introductions to the practice, the whole basis of the relationship will be somewhat skewed.
We all understand that it's a competitive job market out there, and everybody's trying to get a job and doing things to give them the edge, I guess in the same way that probably a lot of athletes take steroids. But when we're handing out the medals at the end of the process, we want to know who's clean and who's not.
Absolutely. Great information. So we talked about hiring new staff and things to look for a new practice. What if someone is about to take over an existing practice as an acquisition? I've heard a lot of people talk about re-interviewing and rehiring the staff before allowing them to actually become your new staff. Like, don't make it a given that you're buying somebody out and the staff's coming over with you. You actually should do a new hire process with all of them just to make sure that they understand that it is a new owner, even if it's just for a psychological reason. Would that be something that would be a time frame to be able to find some of this type of information? Obviously, the resume would if they've been there for 5 years, they've been in the same place for 5 years, so wouldn't be a whole lot of checkup on that. But the first few areas of this, I would think would still apply. Is that accurate?
I'll answer the question in a couple of parts. First of all, I think extending your due diligence process when you're buying a practice to staff is essential, and that goes well beyond embezzlement. I like what you said about if nothing else, it's a way to show these people that there's a new broom, and that they're now going to be taking direction from somebody else, because a lot of times they sort of want to push back at that. There's probably not a whole lot of chance that you're going to uncover an embezzler through that interview process. As you pointed out, Jonathan, there's a bit of a knowledge gap here. I mean, these people know the practice. They know dentistry in some ways probably a whole lot better, at least in terms of how the business of dentistry functions, than the purchaser. So I'm not sure necessarily you're going to find a whole lot there. But for non-embezzlement reasons, yes, you definitely want that interview process.
What about like the background checks? Think that could uncover anything?
There are some legal impediments that you're going to run into fairly quickly, and I think when somebody's buying, they need to ask that question and then take direction from the attorney who's helping them. I think in a lot of states, whether there's an interview process or not, and even whether there's a decision process about whether or not to retain an existing employee, if somebody's employment does continue after the purchase, I think in a lot of states they're treated as if they're not a new employee, but an existing employee with accumulated seniority and everything else. The ability to apply background checking in that situation is probably limited in most cases.
So what advice would you give to the person he's made an offer, it's been accepted, he's going to be starting in a practice that he has now acquired?
I'd like to wind the clock back a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing I'd suggest to somebody buying is that they need their attorney to focus on the possibility that there might be some kind of misrepresentation in the purchase. And there are two types of misrepresentation. The first type is when somebody's selling a practice knowingly overstates the value. We were called in not that long ago to deal with a situation where somebody bought a practice. They were told there were 1,900 active patients.
Mm-hmm.
When the dust settled, there were about 600. And you can put your evaluator hat on very quickly and figure out the impact of that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a really great point. I never even considered the fact that embezzlement can happen to dentists by other dentists in that same fashion.
Yeah, and I mean, whether it meets the formal definition of embezzlement or not, it's not a good thing.
Right.
So the first possibility is misrepresentation knowingly by the seller. The second possibility is that something's going on the seller doesn't know about, but certainly is of relevance to the purchaser, like embezzlement. So we want to make sure that the agreement between the parties contemplates some of these things and protects the buyer. So is the seller, for example, if the appraisal that's done says that there are 1,900 active patients, does the seller certify that the information in the appraisal is true or not? Because the appraiser normally isn't taking that role. They stamp this thing full of disclaimers that say, basically, I got my information from the buyer and I'm not really bearing any particular responsibility as to its veracity. So we want the seller to certify that the information is true, first of all. The next thing that happens is there are some business practices that a seller might carry on that the buyer won't, that cause problems. And really simple example, we all know that if you're making an insurance claim, you are required to collect the copay, or to try to collect it anyway. And if you have the policy of not collecting copays, what the insurance companies do is adjust what they pay you. So let's say a treatment costs, your normal fee is $100. What the insurance companies are expecting you to do is to, let's say it's 80% coverage, collect 80%, $80 from them and $20 from the patient. Not to collect $80 from the insurance company and walk away from the part that the patient is supposed to pay. And the insurance company's rationale is that if patients aren't paying anything, they will consume more dentistry, and that will cost us more money and upset our actuarial tables. So what the insurance company's perspective on that is that, doctor, if you are prepared to do that treatment for $80, that's absolutely fine. But what we should be paying you is 80% of $80, in other words, $64, not $80. Mm-hmm. So our coverage and what we charge is based on the assumption that patients have to reach into their pocket a little bit for dentistry. That's the way the rules are supposed to work. Honestly, there are a lot of people who ignore those rules. And from the perspective of a buyer, if the person selling you the practice is doing that, you need to know that. You need them to, in fact, in the agreement, certify that either they're not doing it or to describe their practices. Because here's what happens. Somebody will buy a practice not having discussed this issue. Then they realize that the former owner wasn't paying copays, which I think most of your audience will realize is unethical or worse. And now they have a horrible choice. They either continue doing what the former owner did, which first of all means they're doing a lot of discount dentistry on a different cost structure than the former owner, because now they have to pay for the purchase. Or they will decide, well, I can't continue that unethical practice. I have to start collecting copays, and then the patients all leave.
It can be a difficult situation to find yourself in.
Not a lot of good choices there. Mm-hmm. So this is something that has to be very much in the discussion and brought on the table. Now, that didn't have a whole lot to do with embezzlement, but in terms of the minefields that I regularly see people buying practices fall into, that's a biggie.
One thing you touched on that I thought was really important, and we discussed this a little bit before we started talking today, is that a lot of business people and dentists in particular don't really understand who has what responsibilities in certain situations. For example, you just talked about how the appraiser will put off any type of responsibilities of making sure that the information given in their report does not bind them to some type of attestation or promise that the details are absolutely 100% accurate, because they've got a CYA to be able to make sure that they aren't going to be sued if it comes back, instead of 1,600 or 1,800 active patients, there's actually 600 active patients, because they don't have the time to go in and count charts when they're doing an appraisal for the most part. So
that's absolutely true. I mean, if there's something that is grossly wrong, there's some possibility they will spot it and deal with it. But they're not auditors, and it's not their job to verify information. They could only function really if they assume that what they're given by the buyer is true. By the seller is true. So buyers have to be aware that simply because something is in an appraisal, that doesn't make it true. The other thing that we touched on, and I suspect this is where you're going with this conversation in part, is that people also assume that if embezzlement was happening, that their CPA would find it. And it happens sometimes, but the last statistic I saw, which is a bit dated, I think it came from 2007, was that in dentistry, CPAs found about 8% of the embezzlement that was going on.
Is that 8 or 80?
8.0.
Yep.
So, and this is not in any way faulting the CPAs. It's simply a reflection of the system in which they work. Two things happen. First of all, when people need their financial information, they need it at a certain period of time in the year. And almost everybody needs their information at the same period of time. And so that means that the CPA profession spends from kind of February to the end of April, and maybe a little bit beyond that, pretty overwhelmed. The second thing is that most doctors do not want to pay for CPAs to do the extra amount of work and diligence and scrutiny it would take to have a chance of finding embezzlement. They opt for kind of the lowest cost accounting that they can get, which is called a write-up or a compilation engagement. Nothing wrong with that, but they just need to realize that in that kind of engagement, the CPAs are very clear that they're not doing any kind of analysis or comparison or anything.
If you actually read the first page of that report, most people just throw that one away, but that's where it says it. If you receive a report from your accountant, it'll have on that letter saying we have not audited nor reviewed this. We've compiled the information given by the client, and we do not promise that anything is accurate.
And again, if you want something different from your CPA, you can have it. You just have to expect to pay for it. I think the problem that the dentists have sometimes is that they really assume that their CPAs are doing a lot of things uncompensated that they just aren't.
So one thing for people out there that can to hear about different things of that nature, just from a personal experience, if we are only looking at, if your CPA has never looked at your practice management software, it's going to be a lot harder for them to find any type of discrepancies, because they're just going to be looking at numbers. If your CPA never looks at the percentages and compares them to standards of industry, then that chance goes down. There's none of them doing these things. Absolutely 100% does not mean they would find it. It just means that I would think if they were that involved, that they actually are looking in your practice management software on a regular basis, that would increase the possibility of them possibly uncovering something like that. I don't want to make any assumptions that would be the case.
There are, when you look at the anatomy of embezzlement, there's stealing and then concealing.
Mm-hmm.
And the stealing always happens at the same place. I mean, it happens either when money comes into the practice from patients or when it goes out. Most of the time, nobody's there to watch that. Neither the dentist nor the accountant nor the bookkeeper. The embezzler can choose the time and place when they steal. What we all have a chance of seeing is concealment. So what Jonathan's really saying here is concealment can happen in a couple of places. It can happen between the practice management software and the accounting software, like QuickBooks. And Jonathan's right. If the accountant looks at the practice management software, and by practice management software, we're talking about things like Dentrix or EagleSoft or OrthoTrack. If the dentist starts from the output from the practice management software and follows that through the accounting process, you will catch some kinds of embezzlement. Not many, but you'll catch a little bit. If you don't even look at that, you won't catch anything. And I think that's what Jonathan just told you. the majority of embezzlement in dentistry happens inside the practice management software. And unless accountants crawl way further into that than I've ever seen any of them do, they're not going to find it.
Right. There's no way I could sit down in front of every single one of my clients at the end of the day and watch the closeout of the day or sit there all day long and look at what they do with the cash receipts or the checks that come in through the mail or anything like that, or managing the mail. It's just not a possibility. I mean, for logistically or financially or anything like that. So I guess the overarching theme we're trying to hammer in here is that don't just trust that your CPA is doing this. Don't just trust that you're being covered. You'll have to be aware of what's going on the inner workings of your practice, who is in your practice, and what they're doing within your practice. Is that kind of a good way to wrap that up for what we're trying to get across with that?
That absolutely is. What I'm hoping next is that we can go to my favorite topic.
Okay.
And my favorite topic is this. I'd like to answer the question, what do most practicing dentists misunderstand about embezzlement?
Sure.
Okay. What everybody does, Jonathan, is they take what they understand about other types of crime and they assume that what applies elsewhere will also apply to embezzlement. What this means is that people think that the way that we stop embezzlement is that we take away people's opportunity to steal. And I'll give you an example of this. A lot of dentists have been told, you really should take the bank deposit to the bank yourself. And the logic behind that statement is that somebody somewhere has stolen by, on the way to the bank, removing some money from the deposit and hoping that the scrutiny of the doctor and the accountant won't find that.
Mm-hmm.
And don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying there's anything bad about the doctor making the bank deposit. However, if I am a thief, what I do is really simple. And full disclosure time for your audience, Jonathan, a long time ago, I used to be one. Every thief starts the same way. They study their environment. They look around and they see what control systems are in place, what the weaknesses are in whatever control is being used, and that's what they exploit. We talked about hiring a minute ago, and I want to give your audience one more statistic. Less than 15% of the embezzlement we see is conducted by people who got through the hiring process when they shouldn't have. So they have a criminal record or they've been fired before for embezzlement or something like that. 15% of embezzlement is done by those people. 85% of embezzlement is done by long-term employees with no tarnished past whatsoever, and they simply come in one day and start stealing.
That's definitely what you read about in the news.
It is. And the advantage that these people have over their doctors is knowledge. They know the systems and they know the doctor and how they think and what they look at and what they don't. And I often describe embezzlement as a crime of navigation. So I look at whatever scrutiny is in place and I find a way around it. I'll give you a great example of this. One of our victims was a female dentist, and she had something on with her kids on Thursday nights that meant she had to leave the office at 5 o'clock on Thursday. What our thief did, I'm pretty sure, was save up every emergency for Thursday afternoon. Mm-hmm. This lady was booked far more solidly on Thursday afternoons than any other part of the week. Okay, so our thief did everything that she could to make sure that the doctor wasn't running late on Thursday afternoons, which coincidentally was also the day that our thief stole. And you can just picture what the end of that day would look like. We've got the doctor pretty much sprinting out to the car, peeling off her lab coat. And the very last thought on her mind is that, but before I go, I've got to check the day end report. Okay. The office was closed on Friday. The next opportunity that the doctor would have to check the report would be Monday morning, which is now 4 days, including a weekend after things actually happened. And you have to ask yourself how meaningful the scrutiny of that day sheet would be 4 days later, and answer probably not very. So a couple of things come out of this. The first thing is that thieves will find a way. We assume that if we deny that reduced opportunity will equate to reduced stealing. And I think where that assumption comes from is other types of crime. So if you have a burglar alarm on your house, it's pretty effective, because most thieves, when they get to your front door, if their plan is to steal and they see the burglar alarm, won't break into your house. But we have to look for a second at what happens next. What they don't usually do next is go join the church choir and abandon their life of crime. What they do instead is they keep going down your street until they find a neighbor who doesn't have an alarm system, and they break in there. In other words, we didn't prevent crime there. We just diverted it to somebody else. And the alarm system on your house, or since we are talking about Arkansas, that NRA Life member sticker that you probably have on the front door, doesn't prevent crime. It just pushes it off on your neighbors. And from the perspective of somebody putting in a burglar alarm, that's fine. I mean, it does exactly what it's supposed to. What's different about embezzlement is that with embezzlement, the victim's preordained. So, Jonathan, if you're a dentist and I work for you, I only have one possible victim. It's you. Mm-hmm. What I can control, and therefore what you can influence, is not my choice of victim. It's my choice of methodology. So we have to lose the idea that if we just make it a little bit harder for people to steal, they'll quit their job with us and go work somewhere else and steal there. It's not how it works.
Yeah, and I would have to say that within the practice that works as well, because you mentioned opportunity. If you have any loose holes in the practice, if they find one that they feel like wouldn't work, then what their mind is going to do is they're going to say, okay, I can't steal it this way, but can I steal it this way? And they'll just keep moving down the houses until they find the right opportunity.
Yeah. There is always opportunity in a practice. I'm not going to talk about specifics today because I really don't want to end up educating embezzlers, but there is always opportunity. I have yet to see the embezzlement-proof practice, and I've told doctors the only way you could make your practice embezzlement-proof is put down your handpiece and become a full-time auditor. If there's zero revenue, there's 0% for embezzlement, but beyond that, it can always be done. And the biggest mistake that I see dentists, especially young dentists, make is they underestimate the creativity and determination of thieves. So trying to lock down the practice to the point where there are no opportunities is just a fool's game. What really works is something different. And if your audience takes away one thing out of this delightful chat that we've had today, I'd like it to be this. There are a lot of ways to steal from you, but the way that thieves act when they're doing it is what's predictable and constant. And what your audience really needs to do is to get better at recognizing how employees act when they steal. And let's talk about a simple, obvious example, and then maybe one that's a little more subtle.
Yep.
If I'm stealing from you, I'm there lots of extra hours. I come in early or I stay late. I don't want to take vacation. Unless the whole office is closed, then I'll go. But other than that, I'm there all the time. A couple of things going on. First of all, when I steal, I want alone time in the office. So most stealing is done when nobody else is around, which means, if the office opens at 8 o'clock, I might show up at 6 a.m. Or I'll come in on Saturdays to, quote, clean up. So that's one thing we want to look for.
Camouflage is the hardest worker in the practice.
Yeah, it is. the thing about vacation is simple. When I start stealing, it's going to result in anomalies. In other words, in financial records that don't necessarily reflect reality. So there may be a patient who comes in and pays cash, but it gets coded as a credit card payment on their ledger. So when that patient gets a statement from the office later, they may call and they may say, I was in a couple of weeks ago and I had some work done and I paid cash, but I'm looking at my bill now and it says that I paid by credit card. And as long as the embezzler is the person on the other end of the phone, they can make this problem go away. They will say to that person, well, we had somebody new in accounts and they were making a lot of mistakes, so we had to let them go. I'm really sorry that your statement is wrong. But the main thing is that it shows a balance of zero, which is right. And, that's happened to all of us in some corner of our lives over the years. And we've gotten an explanation like that. And we've said, okay, no blood, no foul, and gone away. On the other hand, if the embezzler is not the person getting that call, there's the possibility that whoever does get it realizes that there's something more going on than a simple mistake and brings it to the doctor's attention. One of the biggest embezzlements I ever saw came to light when the embezzler broke her leg skiing. So there was about a week when she wasn't in the office. And on the second day of that week, the fill-in came into the doctor and said, there's something funny going on here. Because I've gotten 4 of these very strange phone calls today. And, if it were one of them, I wouldn't necessarily think anything. But, with 4 of them, this just can't be right. And it was a massive embezzlement. It was over $600,000. And that's how it came to light.
Oh, gosh. So the doc was definitely paying for that ski trip at that point.
Well, I think he bought the whole ski hill.
Oh, no kidding. So they're going to be camouflaged as the hardest worker, the person who doesn't want to take time off. They're probably going to be volunteering to stay late, work late, get everything done for everybody else. They're not going to want to give up their responsibilities to someone else because they're the only one who knows how to do it right. Anybody else touches this, it's going to be messed up. I see a lot of office managers that, that don't manage a whole lot. They'll do a lot of, Susie will come up with like a treatment plan and say, I need this done. And rather than teaching Susie how to do it, the manager just takes it and just gets distracted from whatever they were doing and enters it in for 5 minutes and then lets it go because they don't want anyone else to do something wrong. And just as a management philosophy, that's not, in time effectiveness and efficiency type philosophy, that's not good management. So hopefully you have a big enough practice where you can tell your manager to be able to actually manage the process rather than taking everything from somebody else.
But you just hit on something very important. Embezzlers do not want to delegate. They do not want to cross-train other people to do their jobs. They tend to be control freaks because that helps them in this process. One of the things, though, that is an enabling mechanism, and you asked me a long time ago in this conversation, why do dentists get victimized so much? A lot of dentists I meet, I would describe as perfectionists. And in fact, one of my investigators who is a former dentist says, the percentage of dentists with obsessive compulsive disorder is really, really high.
I'd fit right in with them.
Well, we probably both do. And when somebody's doing something in my mouth, that's great. That's exactly how I want them to think. But it's their enemy when it comes to embezzlement. I guess what I'd say gently is that, and I think that many of your audience, being relatively new dentists, will identify with this. Every dentist has this vision of what I will call clinical utopia. And clinical utopia is when they get to do high-end dentistry all day, make a lot of money doing it, and they don't get dragged into the minutiae of running their office. And what embezzlers do is they offer the promise of that. they have a mutual interest with the doctor. They both the embezzler and the doctor want the doctor to be in the operatory. So there's a commonality here that the doctor doesn't necessarily realize the reasons for. So embezzlers offer that promise, and a lot of young dentists really soak that up. So the embezzlers come across, and you said it a minute ago, as perfect employees. They come in early, they stay late, they're take charge people, and to the doctor at least they present the concept that they want to be perfectionists. So, I'm going on vacation for 3 days, doctor, but don't let anybody else touch those accounts because they'll only screw them up. I'm the only person who can do it properly.
I'm the only one that's going to be able to open the mail to be able to do the insurance. You might as well not even open it because I'm gonna have to.
You just let me do it, and it'll be done right. And for that perfectionist bone that lurks inside almost every dentist I've ever met, they look at this and they think, "Wow, that's the best employee I ever had." Which is exactly what, as a thief, I want you to think, because then I can steal more.
So to kind of wrap it up, there's, we as business owners, as professionals, and as and dentists specifically as clinical people, we can't be all the time, looking at our people that are as potential criminals at every stage of the game, because at some point we've got to give them some layer of trust. To kind of wrap it up, what is there's got to be certain triggers that should turn that switch on to start investigating and having a healthy sense of skepticism. Would you say that what we've covered is good things to turn those triggers on when you notice those types of behaviors?
Certainly a good start. I often quote a former president who was sometimes known as the great communicator, Ronald Reagan, who said, "Trust, then verify." Mm-hmm. What we encourage people to do, we have something that we sell on our website called the Embezzlement Risk Assessment Questionnaire. Not very expensive. And what we encourage people to do is to fill this in, complete it, which takes about 15 or 20 minutes every 3 months. And it focuses predominantly on staff behavior. It's a scored questionnaire, so people get a number at the end and they can benchmark it and see where they stand in risk terms. So 0 to 20 is low risk. Anything over 80 is extreme. And what that means is that there are all kinds of behavioral markers for embezzlement. So if your audience wants to invest a little amount of time in something that is quite likely to produce results, that's it. They can get it by going to our website, Jonathan, which is www.dentalembezzlement.com. The other thing that they can always do is contact our customer service folks, and the email for that is requests@dentalembezzlement.com. And our toll-free number is 888-398-2327. So they can reach us in any of those ways. Questionnaire is a great way to deal with this problem. It takes 15 minutes. If you do that 4 times a year, you're spending a grand total of an hour. And I'm fairly confident in saying if there's embezzlement, you're going to score high on that questionnaire.
Fantastic. I think we've had a really good interview. I think you've given a lot of good information to the audience. So thank you so much for coming on. If someone needs to get in contact with you, are these that you just listed the best ways to get in contact with you directly?
I'll give your audience my personal email address as well. Same suffix. It's david@dentalembezzlement.com.
Fantastic. We appreciate your time and appreciate all that you do for the dental industry.
Well, thanks, and great to have you as a friend, Jonathan.
You too. Thanks.
All right.
Bye. Special thanks to David for making time for us today. And the thought of being stolen from, being embezzled from is pretty scary, because when someone's taken away from your practice, they're taking away from your retirement, your ability to pay the bills, your quality of life, kids being able to go to college, your employees, your patients' care. All of it is at risk if people are stealing from you. So, I personally want to avoid all of these things in my life. It's a little bit different since I own an accounting practice versus a dental practice, but I actually put some of the information I got today in David's interview into a nice little checklist. I set up a quarterly recurring calendar event so that I just go over these to make sure that, in my business, that there's nothing coming up that is a red flag. And I advise you to do the same. Download it. And if you're, a practice owner or a dental dentist that hasn't bought a practice yet, you're not a practice owner yet, go ahead and download it and set up a recurring calendar event to look at it, to make sure that you're ahead of the game. You're going to be way ahead of the people that that don't do this, aren't aware of these things, and you're just going to be setting yourself up on the right path for practice ownership. So if you want to get a copy of that checklist, and along with a lot of other free resources, you just text practice to 33444. That's 33444, or visit startyourdentalpractice.com/bonus if you're outside the U.S. Again, that's practice, PRACTICE, to 33444, or go to startyourdentalpractice.com/bonus if you're outside of the U.S. So that's it for today's episode, but that doesn't mean that the learning and implementation have to stop there. I've created a free report called The 15 Numbers That Will Make or Break Your Dental Practice. This report has been downloaded over 1,000 times by dental professionals. So if you want your free copy of this report that's going to outline what the most important numbers are in any dental practice, and it also includes how to look at your numbers, how to set goals, has a whole slew of really important information that is the culmination of all of my experience as a dental CPA, then just go to startyourdentalpractice.com/free gift. That is startyourdentalpractice.com/free gift. And so that's it for today, Ambitious Dentist. Again, I'm Jonathan VanHorn, CPA and ABV. I'll see you next week with another world-class practice owner or consultant that will help you start your very own dental practice. Thank you guys so much for being a part of the Start Your Dental Practice community. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do me a favor and go to startyourdentalpractice.com/iTunes to leave your honest feedback and review on iTunes. It's going to help me create a better experience, a better show, a better podcast for you, the ambitious dentist. Your feedback really does help, regardless if you liked the show today or not. If you didn't like the show, let me know, because it's going to help me create a better show and podcast for you. Lastly, if you know of anybody that would benefit from today's episode and today's content, today's guest, please feel free to share with them on social media or through email.